Hang on. Got it.
Morning, Stacey. So lovely to see you. Last time I saw you was in Southampton. We had a lovely cup of coffee together and we had a long old chat. And we both said at the end that we could have talked for hours. So we're here now, carrying on that conversation. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. I am actually good today. And yeah, it was so lovely to meet you and have those very, very quick conversations. It's so lovely to meet people in person, isn't it? People that you connect with online. When you meet them in real life, you're like, oh God, like these people are friends. These are important people. So yeah, it's so great to talk to you again today and actually get a chance to talk in more depth.
I know we did go deep as well, didn't we? It started off as like
straight
a
off.
fun meeting, and we was like in there like swimwear. So we got a lot to talk about. But as usual, I love to talk about your past with alcohol and what it was like for you back in the day.
Okay, yeah. So back in the day, I would say I had a very inverted commas normal relationship in like 90s Britain, if that makes sense. So there was alcohol around when I was growing up, but in a really just adults having a glass of wine with dinner if we were out at a restaurant kind of way. And also I don't know how old I would have been, but that whole thing of having like a tiny little thimble of wine mixed with lemonade when you're a certain age and you feeling really grown up. And then I had all the what I would consider usual, maybe this is just where I grew up or how I grew up, but that kind of early teens getting that excitable thing about like having your first sips of alcohol. And I remember my first alcohol that I had that was not moderated by like a parent over dinner as like a little sip was Bacardi. Me and my friends, like we must have been, I don't know, 13, and we went to one of their neighbors' parties that had a bar in their house, which was like madness. And we just got hold of this bottle of Bacardi and ended up drinking it all and then throwing up in the toilets and like that kind of nonsense that goes on in teen years, like just like stupid things that you'll never do again. Or well, I never did again. And then I don't know. Then when I was older, going to clubs, I would drink. Never really not mad amounts. I don't think even in my younger years I could tolerate a huge amount. But it was always really normal, I suppose, in the sense that everybody around me was also doing the same, of my age. And yeah, university, again, same kind of thing, really. It was, I would say that my relationship with alcohol changed. It kind of carried on that trajectory up until, I would say, when the pandemic began.
Yeah. So what you really had was what you could eschew as being quite a relatively normal relationship with alcohol, where you would go out and have a drink and then go periods of time where you wouldn't even think about it.
Oh, absolutely. And there was we never ever had alcohol in the house.
Yeah.
When I was growing up, it just wasn't a thing. It wasn't like, even at that point, it wasn't that we ever, like the adults of the house, had a glass of wine with dinner. Even it just wasn't in the house. Actually, I say my relationship began with alcohol. My difficult relationship with alcohol began at the pandemic. That's not actually true. My husband, Greg, was diagnosed with terminal bowel cancer in the end of 2016, and he was diagnosed in A&E, and then he had a 2-week stint in hospital where they did some operations on him, and it was really absolutely overwhelming because it wasn't expected at all. And when that was going on, I was basically living at the hospital for the hours that I was allowed there. I had 2 small children at the time who were 1 and 3. No, they weren't even that. They, my youngest wasn't even, oh no, she just turned 1 and my other daughter was 2 still. And they were just living at my parents' house while I was at the hospital dealing with this absolute nightmare. And I would come back after 12 hours at the hospital and I would take some sleeping pills with 2 glasses of wine, because I was so petrified, so wired, so in another world. It was like this, it was a reaction. It was like I just had to numb things. I couldn't, going back and seeing my children's faces, it was like I couldn't sleep. I was running on. I think I lost a stone in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
I didn't eat. I couldn't sleep, and I was desperately trying to knock myself out from a very, very nightmarish situation. And I think that's actually when it started to become a little bit of a crutch for me.
I mean, that's the thing. That came out of nowhere, didn't it? Going into A&E, and then
Yeah.
to be sprung with that news. It's like you go into this automatic sort of thing where it's, how do you cope with that? And we're all sort of trained to think, well, by numbing it out.
Yeah, absolutely. I was in, it was like it's really hard to explain, but it's a trauma response.
Yeah.
And it's total fight or flight. And I think your body does some of its own natural numbing itself because it can't take on everything that you're being told, everything you're having to experience. And you're right, there's this, it is maybe a cultural thing to be like, okay, that whole thing, it's a lot like that kind of that mummy culture of like, oh, 7 o'clock, it's bedtime, like you've survived the day with your children, now's the time to numb out, like this is your time, just obliterate those feelings that you're feeling.
Yeah. You say it's 7 o'clock. I've worked in several houses that it's been when they pick the kids up and the mummies come round and it's 3:30 and the prosecco comes out, and
the
then
prosecco,
yeah.
the drink of young mothers, absolutely. Yeah. I hear you.
But then I often thought was, what happens when all these mums go home? What is their relationship then like with alcohol? Do they stop and do they have a cup of tea and do they bath the kids or do they carry on? And that's always an interesting perspective.
Yeah, I think it is interesting thinking about like drinks as a whole to do with motherhood as well. Of I didn't even touch a cup of coffee until I had my first daughter. And I then was in this situation where I was feeling like I'm just exhausted, I can't cope. And it was then I decided that to try a first cup of coffee just for the energy, for the caffeine.
Yeah.
And that was it. And like that's nearly 9 years ago. And I live off coffee, literally live. I drink an astounding amount, like between 6 a.m. and midday. And it is that same kind of thing. It's a different thing to alcohol, but it's that reliance on something else to take you out of your head. And I think maybe when I had children as well, maybe before Greg was diagnosed, it's all coming back to me now. Before Greg was diagnosed, but he was obviously very ill, but no one could tell him what was wrong with him. I had 2 small children, one of them who had horrific colic and just never ever stopped crying. I had postnatal depression because of that, and the fact that like my husband was gradually becoming more introverted and more ill, and no one could tell him what was wrong, and I felt like our lives were falling apart. Yeah. And I think I definitely fell into that whole wine o'clock thing. I mean, and it's so prevalent, it's not even spoken about in hushed tones, it's written on wine glasses
in
Tesco's.
Yeah.
it's really, really accepted, and it's everywhere. It's on social media. It's funny memes. It's that kind of, that like secret, like that kind of roll your eyes, ha ha ha, this is the reality. But it's so ingrained now, and I do wonder what goes on behind closed doors. Like you said, it's one thing to have a sociable drink with friends, to kind of commiserate, celebrate being parents. I don't know, but is it, yeah, what happens behind closed doors when you
And
go
it's
home?
accumulative as well. And like what you were saying about lockdown, what I found was I was sober then, so I was watching it from the other side, but equally it was difficult for me. But I was so grateful that I was sober, because I thought, how would I get the amount of alcohol that I would normally drink in the house? Because
Oh yeah,
everything was shut. Do you know what I mean? So I used to do
yeah,
my daily runs and hide the little miniature bottles in my coat sleeves and in my briefcase, and you know, but all of a sudden lockdown came. It was March, it was hot, people were out. I remember the yummy mummies out in their bikinis, all on house party doing this huge thing. It's like a big gathering. It was a bit of a holiday feeling, because all of a sudden all the responsibility from work was taken away, and although there was all the worry around there, it did have that holiday feel. And it wasn't long before I saw people beginning to do that more and more, drink earlier and earlier.
yeah.
And then I thought, oh, I'll tell you what, this is going to lead into something quite serious, really. So it's that, with Greg being diagnosed as well, and you dealing with all the trauma there, how did your drinking escalate in lockdown?
I would say that the very beginning of lockdown was literally like a 360-degree turn on my alcohol, because the situation that we were in was slightly different, in that Greg was supposed to, he'd had a break of chemo. At this point he was like nearly three years into his diagnosis, and he was literally about to restart chemo on the 23rd of March, which was the beginning of the lockdown. And we had a phone call from his oncologist that said, look, we know what's happening here. We are basically shutting oncology down. Your treatment is cancelled, and indefinitely. We don't know what's going to happen. If you get this disease, because he had bowel cancer, but it had spread at that point primarily to his lungs. And obviously with COVID being a respiratory disease, he had said, if you get COVID, you will die. He was as blunt as that. This is about 2 weeks before lockdown began. And he said, all four of you, being the two of us and our two children, need to shield. All four of you. You must not go outside. And that sounds really extreme now, because we're kind of so many years in, but you have to think about what it was like at that point, when we were watching Italy and them making decisions about who they were going to save. And I was thinking, they will never save Greg. If Greg gets this and he has to go to hospital, they will never choose him. He has stage 4 cancer. He will be left to die. I was also really scared because I have quite chronic asthma, obviously a respiratory disease as well. And I thought, what if I get it? I wasn't in the shielding group, but I was definitely in a high risk category, and I was petrified. I remember watching the broadcast of Boris Johnson, the one where he said people will die.
Yeah.
And it just put the fear of God into people. And I remember watching that at my parents' house and having a panic attack as I watched it, and running upstairs thinking, I can't die. I cannot die, because my children will be orphans.
Yeah.
Because Greg is going to die. I can't die from this. And I started to hatch these mad plans of like always carrying, even though we were shielding as we went in, I was thinking about, if I get it, I need to write something on my arm in permanent marker again, this sounds madness now. It really does, sat here in 2022. But at the beginning, I was going to write on my arm, my husband has terminal cancer. You have to save me because I've got small children. Like, and that was the fear that took me into that beginning of the pandemic. So we just shut up shop, basically. And what we could, I missed all of the queuing outside supermarkets. I missed the one-way system. I didn't see any of that. So we were having to rely on other people to bring us food, which we were so lucky that we had a support system that would do that. But what we found is that people knew our situation. And when they bought us food, they also bought us alcohol. As I wasn't asking for alcohol, but they bought it with them. And it was that gesture. I suppose it's like, what do you bring to a party? Not that this was a party, but like, it's a contribution, isn't it? Of like, oh, how am I going to show you, and people bought all the classics of like alcohol, chocolate, flowers.
Yeah.
Those were the three things that people, if you're in a supermarket and you're like, shit, I want to show these people that I'm thinking about them. Those are the three you go to. And it's also not a coincidence that I put on a lot of weight during lockdown because of the amount of stuff that people bought us.
Cakes. I think we all did.
Yeah, cakes, biscuits, everything, and obviously prosecco. Yeah. That was the drink of choice that got brought to our house again and again and again. And Greg didn't drink. He was never ever a drinker. So I was here with bottles and bottles of alcohol. I really do mean bottles. That, like you said, it was that summer. We didn't have anywhere to go other than our garden. Luckily, we have a garden. So we did nothing but sit around, and I did nothing but drink prosecco, basically, because it was a mixture of that kind of blocking the harsh reality of what was going on, and like, people, they're saying this is a 3-week thing, and then it getting extended and the death toll going up, and the madness of being locked in your home with 2 children. I did no homeschooling whatsoever, not even 1 hour of homeschooling through the whole pandemic. I just couldn't. I just thought, I'll have a breakdown. I will have a nervous breakdown if I'm expected to also be a teacher. So we just hung out, basically, and my alcohol intake became a way to numb out what was going on. But also I did tap into that whole holiday thing that everyone else was. And you saw it again and again, didn't you, of like people, a bottle of wine was opened at midday with your lunch to sit in your garden. Yeah. Because it's like this incredible summer that suddenly happened in March. And it was all okay. I mean, that, what else could we do? There was nothing to do except eat and drink, basically.
Yeah, but you as well, on top of that, had the worry of Greg, your relationship, where that was going. And let's be real, alcohol does the job good and proper, doesn't it?
Oh yeah. I mean, I was petrified inside. And there was also the weight of this. So Greg is going to die. We're 3 years in. I'm doing the maths, thinking there's like, the stats are, if you are diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, you've got a 5% chance of getting to 5 years. So what if he dies in the pandemic? These are the last years of his life, and he's basically trapped in our house, which in some ways was good, because obviously we got to spend that time together, but it was stressful time. Some of it was lovely, but some of it most certainly wasn't. And I think I also used alcohol at that time to kind of pretend we were somewhere else. I, talking about my past with alcohol, it was always positive in the fact, that feeling of like, oh, I'm going out, I'm with friends. It was like a party thing. When I was younger, I never used alcohol as that way to numb the feelings. It was always associated with fun. So I definitely used it in that way as well, which was, I desperately need to feel happy. And alcohol did, like, let's be real, it did provide that. It made me feel good at that time of like, I'm sat in the sun, I'm drinking prosecco, it's going down very nicely. I can pretend I'm somewhere else. I can pretend this is something else other than a global pandemic with my terminal husband kind of getting thinner and thinner.
It's hard to imagine. But
do you know, it's hard to remember. It's weird. Like, I don't know if other people, I don't know if you feel like this about the pandemic. I feel like I can't remember a lot of it.
Like a dream, yeah.
Yeah, like the lockdowns.
Yeah. But do you know what, Stacey, I was going to ask you as well, was that we all kind of went into our own isolation in our heads, I think.
Yeah.
Like, so Greg, he was probably wondering about where he was going with it all and how long he had left to go. You were like going into yourself with like numbing your emotions out on your, do you see what I mean? We went into our own isolation.
Yeah, I think that really, really happened with me and Greg. I would say that I think we went into our own little internal bubbles. And I became really aware of how much I was drinking, but I didn't vocalize it to him because I didn't want him to see, because I didn't want him to try to stop it. If I'm honest, I felt like this is all I've got. I don't have my support network. I'm basically in charge of everything. I'm looking after everybody. I need something. And so that's when, like, I really did enter into my own little bubble where I would hide bottles. I was hiding bottles of alcohol that came into the house. I was hiding the empty bottles so he couldn't see how much I was drinking. I was hiding the glasses that I was drinking from. So I would have a glass maybe really early in the day, maybe at like, I don't know, in my head, it got to 10 a.m. of like, that's an acceptable time to have a glass of prosecco. And at 10 a.m. was acceptable in the lockdown. And then I would be, I'd hear people coming down the stairs, and I would like try and like hide it behind cookery books in the kitchen, or like put it back in the glass cupboard and hope that he wouldn't open the door to see that there was a full glass in the glasses cupboard, and like thinking of an excuse of like, if he did open it, what would I say? Like, why would it be there? And that was this weird little bubble that I had in my head of it was just me against the world. I think I just turned inwards and was trying to cope in this situation on my own, and alcohol was my my refuge in that. And I definitely didn't want to stop, and I knew that Greg, if he witnessed a lot of stuff, that he would have really called me out on it. And I didn't want to, and I know if he had have done, I would have argued with him. I really would have done. We'd have had a big old row, I imagine. I don't really like being told what to do, and that would have gone down badly.
This is why we got on so well when we met, because both very honest from the beginning. I love how transparent you are, and the fact that you didn't want him to know because he would tell you not to do it or stop you doing it is so brutally honest. And I can really relate to that. And that's why I think a lot of us do this hiding business, because not only is the shame and the stigma and the guilt in there, is also the fact that it's the, what now? Now you've caught me out. What does that mean? Does that mean that I've been found out and I'm going to have to do something about it? And there's the denial, because you don't want to do anything about it,
No, I had absolutely no interest in doing anything about it at all. Because I think also because Greg was the one who had terminal cancer, he was actually very protected in a lot of ways because he was the epicenter of everything. And then the layers of support kind of ripple out from that of like and you never rely on people inwards, you only rely on people who are outside of in your next ripple out. So I couldn't rely on him. I had to rely on people like my family, my friends, but they were taken away from me. I couldn't rely on my children because they're my kids, they're tiny. That's not appropriate. And I was having to deal with all of it, like looking after the kids, looking after him as he was getting iller and iller. And I felt like I couldn't have that one thing taken away from me. And I wouldn't have wanted to hear that from him because I would have felt like, well, I'm looking after you. Who's looking after me?
Yeah.
I've got fucking nobody to look after me here.
Yeah.
And like, you know, not just emotionally or physically, but like, I remember at that time, all I wanted to do was hug my mum, as I'm sure, you know, as I'm sure many people did, that was like this feeling. But I wanted to be a child. I wanted to feel like I just want someone to look after me. I want someone to cook me some dinner and put me to bed and say, it's going to be okay. You don't have to worry. You just go and relax. And like just go and listen to music in my bedroom on my own like a teenager. I couldn't. I had to be this like super responsible adult that kind of kept. I did some writing recently about that time where I referred to myself as the perennial cheerleader, because it was like I had to kind of like keep spirits up and like keep everyone going. And when Greg was feeling like really stressed and really down, I had to be kind of like, it's okay, everything's fine. And like with the kids as well, they were obviously worried about what was going on and they were bored and just annoyed, and I was buoyant for everyone else. And I felt like I don't know, maybe that's why like my drink of choice at that point was prosecco, because it was like this bubbly, buoyant thing that kind of kept me up. It was bubbling me up with energy.
But as you said in the beginning as well about that word prosecco, it almost makes it okay. If it was like triple gin and tonic, it might sound quite different. But do you know what? I mean, as you know, she's had cancer 3 times, and when I used to go to the hospital and sit there or go home, and she would be convalescing and whatever, no one really ever asked how I was. So I really hear you there. And I was the one that was making sure the kids were okay, and everything was running fine. And that she was okay, but it was me that had to go to bed and worry and stuff. And as I said before, alcohol is amazing at doing its job, and that's blunting all the emotions out. But it's so short-lived that it works in the beginning, but an hour on, and then you sort of coming back to earth. It's like, oh God, I can't drink too much because I've got this to do later or this tomorrow. And it's a very short fix, isn't it? Did you find that?
Oh, absolutely. And and that is the worrying thing about it, is because it is a short fix, especially if you're starting drinking at 10 a.m. By the time you get to lunchtime, you're like, oh, I'm exhausted. Your energy's dipped. You've got so many hours left of the day that you're like, well, I need some more. I need a top up. I need a top up. I need a top up. And during that lockdown, I remember I was putting my children to bed, and obviously, they were going to bed later. I was putting my children to bed. I remember like going up and doing stories with a glass, with a flute of prosecco on their bedside table, and I remember not being able to read the words. And I couldn't quite read them. I couldn't quite see, because at that point, I mean, I'm not like when we talked, you'd talk about like, the volume that you would drink. I can't drink that volume. Wasn't like, oh, I'm drinking 6 bottles a day. Nothing like that at all. But for me, how it processed itself in my body was that I didn't have to drink a lot. It was just the kind of the longevity of it, from like morning to early evening, was like enough to keep me going, but also keep me numb. And it was at those bedtimes, and bedtimes of kids are just hard, so hard. And I was doing all of the bedtimes myself. Like do it. And then, because I knew I'd be the one getting up. My youngest daughter at that point was like such an early bed. There were mornings she was getting up at 4:30. My eldest daughter is a real night owl, so she'd be going to bed at like 10:30, and I'd be doing the mornings and the evenings, and in the middle looking after everybody. And I would be getting to that bedtime thinking, I just need this to end. I just need to go to bed. I just need, and I never had a problem sleeping. I was just like in bed, done, out. And then obviously it would start again, that, that kind of, that Groundhog Day again. But the weather was nice again and we had nothing to do. And that was a coping mechanism that I saw reflected back on me as well, on social media. People who weren't in my situation were doing the same. It wasn't like I was alone thinking, fuck, I'm in a really, precarious situation here. Everyone else is doing this, but I'm doing this. It was like, we're all in this together. Everyone's in this. And there is such validation in that.
I know. It was crazy times. How was Greg's health then at this point? Was he really declining because he wasn't having treatment?
I would say that he was, do you know what, for the majority of Greg's illness after his diagnosis, he was very well, except for the effects of chemo. So the fact that he wasn't on chemo made him actually better. Like he wasn't, I mean, he was exhausted and he was losing weight. Again, I didn't notice it really that much because I was with him every day, all day. It was only when people then saw him, they were like, oh, he's lost some weight. And obviously losing weight is not a good sign in cancer, because it probably means that there is more cancer in you. And we then had, and after that, we never saw Greg's oncologist again. Like, we never saw him again. Everything was done on phone. So Greg then did go for a scan after that first 6-month lockdown, where we were shielding for 6 months and we just didn't leave the house for 6 months, which now when you say it, God, I get claustrophobic after a Saturday afternoon. And the thought of like 6 months in my, we don't live in a big house. We live in a 2-bedroom open plan house.
Yeah.
It is small. So like we are literally on top of each other. I think about that now. I can't believe that. But he had a scan afterwards, and we were told on Zoom that the cancer had spread to his liver in the lockdown, which was a very, very surreal moment to be watching. That's the last time I actually physically saw Greg's oncologist, was on Zoom. And he was obviously probably in his daughter's bedroom, which made the whole thing so much more surreal to be told, like, and, in the cancer world as well, if you know anything about oncology, you know that when things move to the liver, like that's the beginning of the end in many, many cases. So to be suddenly witnessing your oncologist in like a pink bedroom with like these stickers all over the wall behind him, telling you that the cancer spread to his liver, and you're having to like watch your own reaction on the screen, because obviously like you can see yourself and you're having to kind of,
that's weird.
And I was sat next to Greg, so I was watching Greg's reaction on the screen. It was like an episode of Black Mirror.
Yeah.
Of like, it was almost like I was floating out of my own body of like, this is fucked. This is madness. And I think as that, as the pandemic carried on, and then we were kind of in and out of lockdowns, Greg's health did start to deteriorate, and then he was put back on treatment. But yeah, that drinking kind of continued. But I started to realize, as it started to become more obvious that Greg really didn't have very long left, something kicked in me, and I think it was probably my maternal instinct, which was, I'm going to be alone soon with these girls, and they do not need an alcoholic mother. I don't believe I was ever I don't believe I was an alcoholic, or I believed I had quite disordered thinking about alcohol because of circumstance. But my best friend was an alcoholic, and he's 8 years sober. And it was really interesting to have him on the end of the phone, because he was the only person that I was telling about the alcohol. And because he had like years in AA, he was a sponsor, he's heard and seen it all, and was like, there was no judgment coming for him. So I felt I could tell him. And he was telling me stories about, well, when people think about alcoholics, they think about homeless people like drinking neat bottles of vodka for breakfast. And he said, no, like, you go to AA, you're talking about the middle class women who are going to Waitrose and then have to pop to the toilets to just quickly swig the gin that's in their bag.
Yeah,
that's where those people are.
Yeah.
And that was a real wake-up call for me, because I was like, I don't believe I've got an addictive personality, but I was like, I'm only human. Like, if you put enough of this stuff in your body, like that, it wins. Biology wins. And it's the same with Greg. Like, people thinking, oh, you can do this. It's not, positive thinking is not going to cure you. Biology wins. And it's the same with alcohol. Like, if you put enough in it, your body will crave it more and more and more, and it will win. And I think I just thought about my girls and just thought, fuck, like, if anything, I've got to be on my top game when this happens, like, not literally at the bottom. So I made the decision to not have any alcohol in the house. I told everybody to not buy me any alcohol at all, not to come round with anything.
Gifts, nothing. But did you stop straight away?
Yeah, I did. And then I went for a good couple of months without anything. And it was fine. It was actually fine. I most certainly wasn't drinking enough at all for there to be like a withdrawal situation at all. Like I said, it wasn't really the volume that I was drinking that was the problem. It was the
consistency of
it was the consistency, yeah, and the intention.
Yeah.
I think that for me was the real wake-up call. And then when I did have those months where I didn't drink, I realized it was the intention that was the problem.
Yeah.
And then Greg died last year, September 2021, and that was really I can't really remember loads about that time, to be honest. My mind's blanked it out, but I know that I was like, okay, this is a dangerous time for me. I know that I need to just not have it in the house. Because that for me was my problem. To go out with friends and have a glass of wine over dinner, lovely. My intention with that was like kind of like how I was when I was a teenager or like younger, that the intention was different. It was sociable. It was fine. When I have alcohol in the house, it's game over. It's like it changes something in me. And then it's about like the obliteration of feelings, like that whole thing of like being on your own now in the house, having to cook dinner with no one to talk to, the normal arguments about making 3 dinners for 3 different people because no one likes the same thing, and that loneliness in the evening. I just knew that's dangerous for me. So I've still I've not had alcohol in the house since.
Wow. And when Greg died, what was the funeral like? Because when my mum died, her partner John, he had arranged like an afternoon tea in the pub, and it was beautiful.
Yeah.
There were like china, crockery. It was so lovely when we all got there. And I looked at it and I thought, do you know what? I can't handle a cup. I don't want this. I want to get drunk.
Yeah.
So I went up to the barmaid and I said, look, I know this is meant to be like an afternoon tea, but if I give you my card, can you just keep the bar open? And I was like an animal. Like
Really?
literally, I was drinking everything in sight.
Yeah.
To just get rid of the emotions of the last, not even on the day, it was the build up to the
Yeah.
funeral, all those emotions and the upset. But I was with mum when she died as well. I held her hand when she took her last breath, and then she died. For her, she had me and John with her, but it was on a Sunday and she couldn't be taken away for a few hours, and John wouldn't cover her over.
Oh,
There was so many things
it's hard.
made me react. So actually, it was almost like, right, you've got to this bit of this traumatic experience. Now you can let go. Oh my God. It was like chaos.
Yeah. Greg's funeral was I think some people were afraid that it was going to be, well, a family member was a bit worried and said afterwards, they were like, oh, it was really lovely, but I was afraid it was going to be a carnival or I don't know, a circus, she referred it to, because Greg was in a band, as he would refer to them, a moderately famous band. And it was an open funeral. We were, really worried about how many people were going to turn up. And so we booked a music venue that was really important to Greg and the band as for the wake. So it had two bars. We hired like street food to have in the garden there, because we were thinking this is going to be like a big thing. And it was, I think we had about, I don't know, I think maybe people told me they thought there was about 700 people, 800 people at his funeral. And then when we went back to the wake, there was a lot of celebration there. Like we'd got our children, so children were definitely invited. It was really important to me that in particular that my daughters were there, and we had got them to make cookies to sell to raise money for charity there, and they had their own cookie stand. And so there was we'd had lights put up and there was bunting, so there was like a real celebration feel. The kids were up on the stage dancing, they were offering out like for dance battles, all the adults. And I think, and also there is that thing of the wake, isn't there, where it's like this collective
Yeah.
And that feeling of like there's 2 bars open. I mean, people could not offer me a drink quick enough. It was the last time that I can't remember the last time I saw so many adults drunk, like really drunk. And I there was lots of that stuff of like like the men in my family did this thing which I've seen at other funerals, which is like the propping up of the bar, which is they're kind of holding court at the bar as like almost like as hosts, I suppose.
Yeah.
I didn't stop talking for 12 hours and I lost my voice for about 2 weeks afterwards, because I was like the widow, so I was the ultimate host. It was a bit like being the bride at a wedding. Everyone wanted to talk to me, so they did like their host bit at the bar. So they were, I saw them like doing that thing with the arms around people that they didn't know, chatting, buying rounds in at the bar. And I think, my brother, I think drunk more than he's drunk possibly in his life, and ended up like he couldn't even get up the next day. He was so ill. And but there is this, maybe it is like weddings as well, this thing, it's like the celebration, the commiseration. It's this thing of we're all together, let's buy each other a drink. But maybe more so at a funeral, because we don't quite know how to deal with those emotions.
Yeah.
And I think people didn't know how to deal with me, because, what do you say after, oh, right, your husband's just died, we were at his funeral. I don't know what to say to you, but what I can do is buy you a drink.
Yeah.
And I think, and we don't know how to talk. We don't know how to do funerals. We don't know how to do death. We don't know how to do grief. And I think, the wine carried on coming after Greg died. When people dropped stuff at our house, which was very, very often, there was the wine, there was the prosecco. Again, it's that thing of like, I don't know what to do. I'm going to give you some flowers. I'm going to give you some wine. And you're very, very vulnerable in grief. You're very vulnerable, even though I know I'm a mentally strong person. I know that I've got a really great family and support network, but I'm vulnerable. I'm really vulnerable. And I had to, I definitely poured some of it down the sink. And it made me then think of like, oh my God, like this is like a film. Me, like my husband's died and I'm pouring bottles of wine because I can't, it's so dangerous for me. And I thought, how is this my life? How have I got to this? But this is what I try to do in my writing, is about trying to normalize things to do with grief, so that maybe we can have some better conversations about it, rather than relying on gestures that are not particularly helpful for people. Because I don't know how helpful alcohol is in grief. Well, it's not helpful. It like you said, it's short term. It's that it could be that like numbing, but that's the thing, when you push stuff down, that doesn't make it go away. That stuff is still there, and it will just come out later, and it will come back harder and with three heads.
And as you said earlier about the Groundhog Day, what it does, it comes back with three heads. So what is the solution? To drink more to make it go away again.
Yeah.
And it pushes it to the back, then it comes back. It's the hamster wheel again of alcohol. I've got a friend actually whose wife passed away from cancer when she was 38. And he cannot drink at all, because as soon as he drinks, it brings it all up. So he manages his emotions by not drinking, because he knows that if he does, they will be 50 times worse.
Yeah,
so people might think he's in denial there, but he's managing his emotions a lot better than if he was to drink, because it's more up and down then.
Yeah, it's without these certain crutches, it most certainly is harder, because you're forced to face all your demons. You're forced to sit in those emotions, which can be staggeringly hard, and to not reach to, to distract, to constantly distract, to numb, to actually sit in them is hard. But I think that it is the better route.
Yeah.
Because there is there's processing, even if it's slow and it's one step, two steps back. It's honest, it's real, and there will be, whether you think you are or not, there's processing going on, and there is healing going on, even though it's really painful. And hopefully, I'm really, still knee deep in all of this, that actually this will set me in good stead for years down the line, rather than like pushing it down, really numbing out with alcohol or food or shopping, or all the classics of how people numb out to difficult emotions. I find that writing about stuff is kind of my way of trying to process that stuff, which is it's definitely harder. But you know, I again, I think about my girls and I think I don't want to waste these years. You know, if anything, Greg's death, his illness, and you know, those years that we had when he was ill, and his death led me to really know in my bones that this is also fucking short, and I've got to live a good life, and I don't want my life to be like a half-life, and I don't want my children's only parent left to be this kind of like a shambles of a person, like a shadow of her former self. I want them to have the best version of me that they can have.
And it's also important to say that you want to be the best version of yourself as well.
Yeah. Oh God. Yeah. Do you know what? Primarily for me,
Yeah.
I want to live. I promised myself when Greg was really ill that I wouldn't die with him. And this is all part of me keeping that promise to myself.
Because for what you've been through as well is really traumatic. So I love your emotional intelligence, and I think that's when we met, we connected so immediately, because I think I was talking to you about, and it's on absolutely no comparison to what you've been through, but the loss and the grief that people feel if they've had a long relationship with alcohol. And for me, it was a 40-year love-hate affair.
Yeah.
And when I stopped, I was floundering around thinking, I don't know what to do with myself, you know. And this is where community came in. And I always say now, like, by the time this is aired, I would have had my 5th event, sober event. And there's 3 bands there, different bands, a magician, and all people from all walks of life coming together. Like what you said about the AA guy who was a sponsor. He said, you know, it's your middle-aged person. There's so many different people coming to the event. And finding a community is so important in life anyway. People who understand you and you can articulate your problems to and share. And that's what I found when we met. We just sat down, had a cup of coffee, and just rambled off. And this is why I wanted to get you on, because I love the way you think. You think in such a way that I've just got goosebumps, and I'm sure people listening to this will feel the same. So, darling, where are you now in your life?
Do you mean in general or with alcohol?
Both, really.
Both. I think that I am in a much, much better place particularly to do with alcohol, because it's not that I don't ever drink, but I still don't have alcohol in the house. And I know that for me at this moment in time, that's how it's staying. Like there's no good to come of anything else. But if I'm out with friends, if we go for a meal, yeah, I'll have 1 glass of wine, possibly two is my absolute limit. That's my sweet spot, and that's it. And that's not very regular in itself, but it's that like I said, it's that intention. When I have that glass of wine, it's with friends, we're chatting, it's sociable, it's fun. The intention isn't I'm hiding it from people and it's about obliteration. So I think I'm in a really good place with that in my life. Up and down, I would say. I think that grief is a funny beast. It really is. And I think those first days of grief are really, really fucking hard. But I think you're in some shock. Even if you know someone's going to die, your body and your mind protect you by keeping you kind of wrapped in this little bubble a little bit. And I found that when I got to about 6 months, so Greg's been dead about 8 months now, I think. When I got to about 6 months, that's when the crying began. I didn't really cry. I cried when Greg died and like at his funeral and a bit after that. But after that, that wasn't my emotion wasn't sadness. It wasn't my go-to emotion. And now it is. So it's kind of constantly changing and evolving and, you know, trying to work out how to be a solo parent. That's actually, you know, people don't tell you that as well about grief, that it's you're not just thinking about the loss, you're thinking about what you've gained of, you know, I've gained the title of solo parent, and what the fuck does that, how am I going to navigate that, this new life that I've got?
And widow.
Yeah. I do you know what, I don't know if I've really had the time or space to really think about that, because that very much relates to like a partnership, a relationship. And my life has, since Greg died, has been so preoccupied with my children, as of course it is, that the term widow relates, you know, I'm in no way in a mental space to think about like dating or potential partners. Like my mind is just fucked, like it's so all over the place. God, the thought of like, I wouldn't want to put that on anybody.
God.
But yeah, so I don't think I've really had the time to think about what the widow bit means to me. Yeah. But yeah, I'm writing a book at the moment, and it's, again, that's like that, you know, I've had to create new crutches and to lean on. We need these systems, don't we? We need these tools in our toolbox to get us through hard times, and writing is most certainly one of mine. So to actually write a book, even though it is incredibly hard, it's a crutch for me to lean on.
And you look at the power of Deb's Bowel Babe of the last few weeks. I mean, she's a force in herself, but since she stopped treatment, you know, getting her damehood, I mean, and the way she still carries herself, knowing that her days are numbered, the power of that and her book, and she's raised millions, isn't she?
Yeah. And I know how much that would mean to her, like through knowing her personally, but also through knowing, you know, the messages that when we announced publicly that Greg was in hospice and, you know, he had weeks to live, the messages that we got that he could actually read was it was kind of like being at your own funeral, where you actually got to see what people thought of you. And I mean, what a thing to know how many people you have had an impact on. And I know that, you know, this is just harrowing for her family, but there is some solace in that knowing that those things happened. Yeah, she's great. That energy of hers is incredible.
And that will go on after as well. And I'm just so grateful, Stacey. Again, I like to keep these around an hour, and I could talk to you for another hour. You were very infectious. So
that's a lovely compliment.
Yeah, you're just so honest, and I think people will really get a lot from the last hour that you've shared with us. So I'm so grateful to you.
Oh, well, thank you for giving me this opportunity to talk about it. I think it's, you know, grieving is something that we are all going to experience, whether we like it or not. And, you know, if we're lucky, we'll experience it many, many, many times, you know, which is a weird thing to say, but if we're lucky to love people, and we live a long life, we will grieve many times. And I think if we can open up these dialogues about grieving and the and things that surround it, it can be helpful to all of us.
Like you said, bloody
big
hell.
Stuff. Big stuff.
What you're doing to me, I'm literally goosebumps galore here. So thank you so much, and I'm glad you're okay. And I hope that we can meet again soon. Absolutely. But I'm going to keep a whole day free.
Oh yeah, we need that time, don't we?
Me too. All right. Thank you so much, Stacey.
Thank you, Dave.
Take care. Bye.